You said it in one sentence pretty well. It's a war on people, not a war on drugs. What needs to change? If we're not going to do what we're doing, and clearly what we're doing is not working. Everybody wants to point to the pandemic now because it was a major event, but this was a problem way before the pandemic. We go back to prohibition and all this kind of thing. We're not going to arrest our way out of this. So what should be happening right now? What should we be doing?
So, yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot from a public policy standpoint to try to kind of right some of the wrongs from the laws that are on the books and the things that we're able to do. Our team works a lot on Capitol Hill and in states to, right now we're working on a bill called the Equal Act, which would, stop the crazy chasm between how we treat crack cocaine compared to powder cocaine, which are essentially pharmacologically, identical, except for crack, the way that you bake it allows it to be a much more pungent punch, cheaper, and shorter lived. And so that was essentially established after, in the 80s, kind of seeing the crack cocaine epidemic. And this is the way that we thought we're going to get out of it. It was a failure. And so to make that a one-to-one and start right-sizing some of those laws, reduce some of the mandatory minimums, allow for judges to see a case and say, the mandatory minimum says you're supposed to go to 10 years, but I think that you would be much better in recovering addiction. So you're going to go to jail for 2. There's all these things that we can kind of start picking at the edges around, limit the ways that law enforcement's able to, do no-knock warrants based upon, a minor drug bust and things like that. There's a lot of those civil liberty aspects of things. But when you're talking about actually winning this drug war overall from a policy standpoint, it is start to take a healthcare approach rather than a criminal justice approach, to allow for experts to lead on this and get people into recovery, through methods that we know work. And so, one thing I do somewhat agree with, but I don't like the way that it's been implemented in practice. It is kind of some of the, medically assisted treatments that we see, that have been effective in places like Europe and Switzerland, where you allow people to come in and utilize, drugs and wean them off in a certain way. But I think that we failed at that as a public policy standpoint, kind of going the other way, and have allowed for open air drug markets to proliferate in places like San Francisco and Philadelphia and Baltimore. And I don't think that's the right way either. We need to find that balance between, actual tough love, and allowing for this and understanding that aspects. But we kind of go one way or the other. We either try to criminalize our way out of it or essentially ignore the problem. And it really is that tough love standpoint where we have carrots, we have sticks. You can't you have to earn your way off of this, but also leads you through a place of empathy and understanding that failure is a part of recovery. That's the one part. You see a lot of things that we try to do from diversion, but the first time they have a dirty urine test or the first time they miss a meeting, we throw them out on their ass or we throw them in prison. And these are the types of things that fail and what bring people back to relapse. So it's complicated, it's messy. But having that tough love aspect and trying to lead with policy and evidence rather than kind of feel, that's where we need to start at the very least.
Yeah. And let's talk about that for a minute, because I'm well aware of some of the safe zone practices and stuff in some of the Nordic and European countries, and some of those that advocate for that in the United States, and they cite the success levels in Europe to justify doing that here, but they're not doing the same thing here.
Right.
That's just bullshit. And maybe it's a thin line between enabling and actually keeping people safe, and it has to do with outcome criteria, I guess. If your outcome criteria is we haven't had a single overdose because we got lasers to shoot through here and see if there's fentanyl in here. We have people there to intervene if there is an overdose. And so we haven't had anybody die in our clinic here. Okay, that's true. But we're not trying to get people to use destructive drugs safely. We're trying to get them off of the destructive drugs. And my problem with some of these programs is they don't have a strong enough exit strategy.
Right.
They got a strategy to get them into the safe zone, but they don't have a strong enough exit strategy to get them out into a program that can actually get them off of the drugs.
Right.
They say, well, we have a social worker in the building. Well, yeah, I got it. But there's not really a strong enough exit ramp to get them out of the safe zone and into rehab. And they say, well, look at our criteria. We haven't had a single overdose. And there are people dying on the street, but they're not dying in here. Well, that's surrendering to the disease.
Yeah.
Yeah.
They
Yeah.
say, we're going to go along with you doing the drugs as long as you don't die on our turf. That's, to me, not a solution.
And I think in, what is it, Switzerland? Or was
Yes.
it? They actually have where they get the people a job and the person has to go to work. And there's more step, like you said, the criteria is more than just, hey, you didn't die. And yeah, that's a very low bar to have. Like, and I don't think that's very much different than how we look at the people, where we look at them like they're the outcasts of society.
Yeah. The goals there are recovery and to move on. And I think the goals here, those are not the same goals. And actually, you kind of look at where a lot of those European countries were prior to trying to bring these types of policies in. They were doing what, San Francisco and other places are doing, essentially just having safe zones and enabling, but it actually didn't get to the underlying root causes until they started getting, more intentional about treating people and weaning them off. The ultimate goal is to have less addiction, to have people recover, to have them thriving jobs, not just to not have someone die here. It kind of reminds me of almost like the parent that everyone knew in high school that allowed everyone to drink at their house. And then it was like, all right, you're safe here for the next 4 hours, but on your way after that, like, it's not really helping. You're enabling a problem instead of actually trying to get to that root cause. So having those interactions between, addiction specialists and doctors and social workers and putting in safe environments, great. But it's kind of like with prisons, like, all right, you have these people here, you have this captivated audience. What's the next step? And we're not doing that next step here. And it's looked at as empathy. And I think it's coming from a lot of the times a good place of empathy to try to help people, but we're really not providing that. You need to stop doing the behavior you're doing, or else this is only going to get worse. And yeah, it's a tough road, but yeah, that's what we need to do. And we're not doing that.
It's based on the wrong predicate, though. Like the parent who says, well, if my child's going to drink, I'd rather him drink here. Well, that's a big if.
Right.
If your aunt had nuts, she'd be your uncle. That's a big if, So you got to say, if my kid's going to drink, are you giving that up if your kid's going to drink at 14? Well, you're saying here in these safe zones, if you're going to do drugs, well, let's not just accept the predicate to that hypothesis there. If you're going to do drugs, well, let's not accept that you're just going to do drugs. What if you don't? What are we offering you as an alternative to that? And the answer is nothing.
Yeah. I mean, you're saying that this behavior is okay, and you're not providing an actual path away from it. And so why wouldn't they drink and drive later on? Essentially, you're getting kind of tacit agreement that this is fine.
If I could do it here,
I can do it anyway. Yeah, why not? And then you have a lack of a law enforcement approach when they're not doing things. So you are in these open air drug markets and you're doing that, but it's not like there's enforcement beyond these areas to actually help keep places clean. And the thing that they're not doing as well, and a lot of the places like in Switzerland, they're actually providing medical care through providing the methadone, or potentially, and sometimes, heroin or the actual drug. A lot of the root causes of crime are people trying to keep up with a $200-300 habit. And that's not getting to that. They're bringing their own drugs there to essentially use in a certain way, but they're still having to rob, deal, prostitute, whatever else to get the financial means to get that. And so you're not actually tackling a lot of these underlying problems. You're just kind of giving a safe space for a couple hours, and then all the other problems still exist. And I don't see how that's going to be effective long term.